I firstly say that this is a super cool stage to be standing on. I'm very privileged to be here. So the sort of instructions for the talk today were to talk about something frontier, big problems. And so I thought I'd talk about an aspect of what I do that I don't usually talk about because it's a little bit more abstract and speculative, but here you guys are with me. So the idea of trusted execution environments, we've all heard. I'm not going to explain it. Too many talks on this already. Well, not too many, but a very adequate number. So as we can tell by the number of talks, TEs are becoming increasingly popular. They're being used by many of the big names we know, many of the most exciting startups, and there's good reason for this. And one of the reasons is that TEs are way more performant than sort of alternative security technologies. And there's a sort of a variety of different, there's a variety of different use cases people use. We've just heard a panel talking about the AI stuff. I don't really need to get into this too much. Ts are very exciting. I think maybe the one thing to mention here, and I'll say it again in a second, is that secure hardware is more important, or is important outside of the purely private privacy use cases that we think about, right? So sensors are really important. Like the C2PA standards have come out. We need some way to deal with the fact that generative models are becoming very, very good, and we need to distinguish data that is generated by actual sensors and data that is fabricated. Similarly, we might want to have some attestations telling us where the data is going, right? If you have some security camera watching you, you want to know, is that data being processed locally, or is it being sent off to some government, or something like that. But I don't want to spend too much time on this. Again, as we've heard a bunch of today, TEs are full of holes. There's many sort of criticisms you can make of TEs and TE security in the supply chain, in bugs that are probably there because the trust assumptions haven't really been tested under a properly open environment. Just like bad security trade-offs that have been made to cater for like GDPR tick box exercises as opposed to sort of catering for the threat model that we care about in this room. And I think all of this is sort of addressable, and that's why I'm working on, as Philip said, on this like Trustless TE initiative, and I'm busy working on sort of establishing a secure, open, and verified silicon, or a trustless TE, as the meme goes. And so this is all very exciting, and usually I spend these talks motivating to people why I think we can achieve something and how we can do it. But one of the ideas I don't get to talk about so much is one of the particular motivations that sort of depends on my extrapolation into the future. So, the standard answers that I have, standard answers I have to give to usually like very angry cryptographers or purist cypherpunks, who typically come around quite quickly, but they'll say, how can you spend $1 or a minute thinking about improving secure hardware when really you could be working on these are pure technologies like MPC, these things that are given to us by math and not this dirty physics, or trust assumptions maybe. And I have various standard answers. Some of them are about like pointing out the ways in which it's feasible to address these concerns, but also just, the use cases are different. I was talking about sensors before, about cameras. MPC can't really like do anything for those use cases. Collusion attacks, as we see in MPC deployments today already, a lot of the cryptographic protocols that give us some form of privacy, or even just I think I'll stop at privacy, are subject to collusive attacks that are often undetectable, typically undetectable, and we need some way to defend against them, and existing MPC deployments do use TEs to protect against these kinds of attacks. And then one of the most practical reasons that we see TEs being used instead of these technologies is performance differences. And this is an interesting one to talk about because I get really annoyed with FHE people, usually the FHE camp, where they'll say, TEs are these ugly things, FHE is pure, and it's has so much better security, but really what's happening is you're comparing FHE from 5-10 years in the future with the existing secure hardware today, which is not a fair comparison. But then, in the same in the same vein, I can't go and say, well, FHE is so slow today, TEs are so fast, TEs are useful for these use cases. So I want to talk about a bit about the role of performance and in particular latency as we go forward, and there continues to be progress on both of these kinds of technologies. So if there's a cryptographer in the room, I added the word caricature, so you can't shout at me, but maybe here's one sort of description of what an FHE-based system looks like. I didn't even describe the use case. It's just like a vibes-based description to point out that there's sort of like two origins of latency overhead that come in, the other kinds of overhead as well. One is the computational overhead of doing like FHE computations, and the other is communication delays, because usually we need some sort of a threshold honesty assumption to, you need to put the decryption keys somewhere, basically. But thinking into the future, these can actually be made to go away, right? On the computational overhead, the algorithms keep improving. People are producing hardware to accelerate this. I know some of them very well, and it looks very promising. And the timelines actually look better than what we expect. Similarly, on the sort of communication overhead side of things, there's always these sort of out of the blue and sometimes even just incremental but rapid improvements in cryptography, which means that we don't need to necessarily rely on the threshold assumptions. And I've already spent more than my 10 minutes that I wanted to, so I'll just fly through this. Basically, cryptography can get way faster. So this begs the question, or this asks the question, will this latency gap be closed? Does it make sense to invest in hardware when perhaps in 3-5 years' time, when the hardware is ready, already some of the cryptography is caught up? And really to ask this question, we need to define what this latency gap is. What does it mean for crypto to catch up to hardware? And I think one useful point to start thinking about this is to look at the high-frequency trading world, and I'll make the connection in a second. So high-frequency trading, as the name suggests, is at a high frequency. And sort of the chart on the right is just telling you they got really, really fast. And the reason for this is because there are very large economic incentives that have pushed these companies to really remove latency at every possible part of the system to be able to make enormous amounts of money. And that's the traditional finance world, but we actually see the same thing happening in the crypto space, where this is from the Ethereum block building world. And basically what's happening here is users are sending their data to intermediaries. Ideally, these intermediaries keep the data private through technical means, and Flashbots is busy here with TE-based solutions. And then these agents sort of participate in the economic system, in this case an auction, on behalf of the users. And what we see happening is that the economic incentives have driven these intermediaries, these block builders, to hyper-optimize, or optimize, hyper, I don't know, subjective, to optimize for latency. And it looks a lot like the HFT world we've seen before, and obviously there's a lot of nuance, but I'll leave that aside. But that's like the specific trading scenario. It sounds like arbitrage, and we're interested in broader use cases than simply finance, right? But actually, if you look at sort of the web design world, there's also a lot of sort of science and research and just qualitative observations that latency is really, really important. And maybe one difference here is that when humans can only perceive latency above 100 milliseconds. And so there's sort of a natural stopping point. If you can get the website served within 100 milliseconds, get the responsiveness there, then you can stop. But this is changing. With the AI revolution, as we might call it, more and more of the activities that have usually been human are being relegated or delegated to these mechanical agents acting on our behalf. And I won't talk about these because I'm running out of time, but if you just imagine this world where a lot of the economic interactions that humans usually participate in, and if you're in this crypto space, you know that very many of our interactions actually are economic by nature, even if they aren't explicitly financial. Very many of these will now be done by machines. And so to basically make the point that I want to make, machines perceive latency way more sensitively than humans. Humans will be less and less involved in many of the coordination as we delegate this to machines. Machines will therefore participate in much more complex markets. Markets are very sensitive to latency, and like we said, markets are very prolific and actually are all around us. And the conclusion here is that high latency will be punished in many, many settings. And the implication there, I guess the second implication, is that we need to make sure that we provide privacy or security primitives for this low latency environment as well. Of course, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't invest in more robust solutions for higher latency settings. That's also very important, and we all know that. But this is sort of my justification for why we shouldn't ignore these corners, and why trying to close that gap between where crypto is and where the fastest, lower overhead technology is a very hard problem, because the benchmark keeps moving. And yeah, like I said, I'm working on the Trustless TE initiative. I thought I'd give you a QR code so you can learn more if you wanted to. Thank you, everyone.